Welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at web bots in Python. So, what are web bots? Well, web bots basically go to the internet and do stuff for you. And there are various ethical issues with web bots, as you can imagine. Sending robots to websites to do stuff for you isn't always ethical. But really, it's up to you to decide whether what you're doing is ethical or not. So we're going to be using Selenium, and Selenium is a testing framework, and it automates browsers, and that's it. And what you do with it, you can decide. As I said, it's mainly used for testing, but of course you can use it to automate things. So we're going to be using Chrome, so you need to go to Chrome and download the Chromedriver that corresponds to your version and your operating system. You then need to save it on your path or in the folder you're using, and it's probably easiest if you're only going to use it once, save it in a folder you're using, but otherwise you'll want to put it on the path. So the best way to do that is to find the folder that contains Python and then save it there as well. So let's start. Well, we're going to be using Selenium, so we need to install it. So we'll just say pip install Selenium. And you can see that for me it's already installed. So from Selenium we can import the WebDriver. We're going to also want to import time. Want to import requests, and we're going to import OS. What we're going to do is we're going to go to Google Images and we're going to search Python, and then we're going to see what the results are and download some of the images. So the first thing is we need a driver, and in this case it's the WebDriver.Chromedriver, and so we say Chrome, and then it's saying where's the executable, and by default it's Chromedriver, so we can just leave it as it is. You can also specify other options, so if you want a headless driver where it doesn't pop up the browser, you can do that. And the first thing I always do when I open a driver is I maximize the window. So we can then run that. And you can see not much has happened, it's just opened the browser. So now we want to go to a page, and the page we want is this one. So we can just copy the URL, and we say driver.get, and then this is the URL, and so it will take us to here. And you can see it's taken us straight to this page. The next thing we want to do is type in Python. So if we inspect the page, you can see that here we have an input, and this input has a class, and we can actually just press the plus button here to give us some details. And so if we copy that, then it's telling us that's what the input is. And this is a CSS selector. So we then want to select the input by saying driver find element by CSS selector, and is this, which we've just copied, and then we want to send some keys. So we'll send the keys Python. So you can see it's gone to the page and it's typed in Python. Now the next thing we want to do is search. So after we've typed in Python, we could then press this button here, but that would be reasonably complicated, because usually when you search you'd never press this button, you just press enter. And so what we'll do is we'll just put a new line character at the end. So it types in Python and then presses enter, and that will search and take us to this page. So to actually download the images, you'll see that this is just a thumbnail. So this image here isn't the actual image. it's a smaller version that you can use to view it here. Because if you imagine, if all these images were kind of 4K, then it would take ages to load them all. So instead it just loads a thumbnail. But if we want to view the actual image, we actually have to click on it. And when we click on it, it opens up, and then this is the image that we'll want to download. But you'll notice that when we click on it, it takes a bit of time to load, and so we'll address that. So first we want to find the images, and each of these images, you can see it has a CSS selector that looks like that. However, we don't actually need this last bit, so we can just use this as our CSS selector. And it is possible to use other selectors, but CSS selectors work every time. And unlike the previous one, instead of finding the element by CSS selector, we want to get a list, so we find the elements by the CSS selector, and it's this. And if you know HTML, then you can see that this is an input field and this is an image field. But if not, you can always just click on it and then see what it says. And then we want to say for image in images, we just want to click on it. And you can see it's now just clicking on every single image. And one thing that Google does is it doesn't load more images until you get near the bottom of the page. So when this gets to the bottom, what it will do is it will stop because we've looked for the images before and then we've run through this. However, if you wanted to change that, you could get it to run through them all and then look for more images. The next thing that's quite strange that Google Images does is you see it has an image, and here this is image dot and then the class. However, it has kind of multiple of these classes, and so if we were to look up all the items that match this, we'd actually get a list and they'd all be images, but only one of them would be the one we wanted. So what we do here is a bit complicated, but it's quite nice. So when we look through the images, we want a list of URLs because we're going to download these images afterwards, and we'll save it as a set so that you can check if something is in it more quickly. And then we want to check the images, and these images are going to be a list of images that we find with that specific class. And we'll just loop through the images, and if the image isn't in the set, we say not image in URLs, and we get the src. You remember with links last time we got the href. With images it's called the src, and if it starts with this, that means that it's not fully loaded yet, because when it's loaded it will probably start with HTTPS. And so if we find an image that is not already, we haven't already looked at, and it doesn't begin with this, then we can use this image. So we can just return the image.getAttribute src. And if we've looked through all of them, then we'll just return none, because we've looked through all the images and we can't find a valid src. We'll find our options, and our options are the driver.find elements by CSS selector, and it's this. And we want to say while not, and then we use the special cast, say image is equal to check options. And this is quite a new thing in Python. So if you haven't seen it before, it's saying image is equal to check options, but from this whole thing it returns the value of image. So if it's none, it will say images, this will say not none is true, so we'll continue. Whereas if it is an src, then it won't do this loop. And in this loop we're just going to wait. And we can wait for any specified amount of time, but a tenth of a second works quite well. And so then in a tenth of a second we'll say, has it loaded yet? And if not, we'll just keep going around in this loop. And then at the end, we want to add it to our URLs. However, before we do this, you might want to see actually what the images are. So what we'll do is we'll just print images at this point so you can see what's kind of happening. And then we won't loop through them all and click on them, so I'll just exit the code there. And you can see each of these is a WebDriver remote web element, and it has a session. So if I was to close the tab and then try doing something with this image, it would break. It has an ID, and this is unique for Selenium. It doesn't mean anything in terms of Chrome, and you can see there's a whole list of them. But now at the end we'll print our URLs that we've got. And you can see quite nicely that as we're waiting for it to load, it actually waits for it to load. And doing this with requests is quite difficult, but another nice thing about our code is all we have to do is change the one line that says type in Python, and we can search for anything really. And you can see that it's updated all the URLs to give us all the different letters in the URLs, and that's because here we have not made a list. So because a string isn't iterable, when we try updating our list, it's looped through and said, oh look, the first thing in this iterable is, I mean in this case an H, and then it's put it in our set, and for that reason it hasn't worked. But what we can do is just do this, make it either a list. You can also make it a tuple, but it's kind of agreed that in Python it's better to use a list because a tuple doesn't look as nice, and of course Python is all about readability. And you can see it's come up with a list of all these URLs of different images. So now we can actually just close the driver because we don't need it anymore. You know, we've got our list of URLs, so might as well close it down. And then we're going to loop through the URLs. And something I saw that was quite nice is rather than saying that our result is the requests.get, what we can do is we can say with requests.get URL as result, which is a far nicer way of doing it. And then we want to get the file name, and the way of doing this is to split our result based on the question marks. So you can see where there's a question mark there. We only want stuff before that, so we split it at the question mark. And the reason we're taking the result.url is because it may have redirected us to an image for various reasons. And then we just take the first part, and then we split it again with the hashtag, because as you remember from last time, we don't want hashtags. And then we split it again based on a slash. However, this time we want the last bit rather than the first bit. And then finally we replace all the stars with nothing. And there might be other special characters, but I've looked through and know that in this case there are only stars. And so you could keep replacing with all the different characters Then we want to say that if there's not a dot in our file name, then we continue. Because if we don't know the file extension, then we're not going to be able to use it. So we take this one. This is going to redirect us, and we're going to end up with just an images. And saving that isn't going to be that useful. However, you might want to instead look at the result JSON and find the file format. But for now, we'll just leave it as it is. And then we want to open the file name, and then we want to write bytes because it's an image rather than text. I'll call it file. We'll just say file.write result.content. So we're writing the content of what we got back, which will be some bytes. So we can run it. And again, it's going to load through all of them. And as I said, this is only going to give us maybe 10 images because not all of them are great. But if you wanted more, then at the end you could look for your images again and then loop through them, ignoring the ones you've already seen. Because of course each image has that unique ID which you can use to differentiate it. And you can see now requests is downloading all these images, and the reason they're grayed out is because when this is uploaded to GitHub, I'm not going to upload these images, so you can run it yourself. And we can see we've got some great images of Python stuff, which has worked really nicely. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. You've seen that we can download images, interact with pages, type stuff in, click on stuff, and this is really useful. And downloading files as a thing is really useful because it means that you don't have to manually right click on each one and click save as and so on. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. You're going to go away and do some web scraping, and I'll see you again same time next week. Till then.